The stage has been set for the 2026 NBA season. From generational talents to aging legends, from champions to rebuilding young cores, this league truly has it all right now. But what can we expect to see from each team, and who has a real chance to win a championship? I've spent the last month doing detailed breakdowns on every single team, looking at what worked last season and what didn't, what moves were made over the summer, and what we can expect in this upcoming season. That meant taking a microscope into each team's offense and defense, their potential rotation, and giving them grades based on how I think they stack up against the rest of the league. The individual videos go a lot more in depth, so if you're looking for specifics on any one team, I'd suggest you go check those out. I like to think of this as a series finale, applying everything I've researched and learned about each team and now putting them into a ranking. But there are so many different ways to go about ranking teams. You could go by which teams have the highest floor or the highest ceiling, you could go by which teams are the best at full health, or who's got the best track record when it comes to injuries. I want to be clear in saying that my personal rankings are strictly about determining which teams I think have the best chance to win a championship. A ton of factors go into that, like durability, what conference you play in, where I think you'll end up in the playoff bracket, and what a path to the finals would look like. Primarily, it's about the quality of a team on both sides of the ball come playoff time. How efficient is the offense, and how can it adjust to different schemes? How strong is the defense, and how can it counter different types of offenses? Ultimately answering the question, who are the best and most versatile teams on both ends of the floor? Before we get into that, I want to give a huge shout out to Factor for sponsoring this video because this 31-day series wouldn't be possible without them. Between the time it takes to research each team and produce these videos while balancing my personal life, I just don't have time to cook for myself. With Factor, in just a matter of 2 minutes, I can get a fully prepared meal on the table without worrying about preparation, cooking, or cleaning up. Just simply unbox, heat it up, and enjoy. The meals are fresh, never frozen, and there's a ton of variety. Recently, they've doubled the size of their menu to 80 plus rotating weekly meals. So whether you're craving a steak, a chicken breast, a calorie smart or vegan option, Factor's got you covered. For me personally, it's bulk season, so I've been loving their protein plus options. And eating clean has never been easier for me since signing up for Factor, which is why I'm super excited to bring you guys a special offer. Head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code HoopVenueFB50 to get 50% off plus free breakfast for a year. You heard that right, that's code HoopVenueFB50 at factor75.com to get 50% off plus free breakfast for a year. For a lot of these teams, it's basically impossible to separate them without splitting hairs, so I broke each group up into tiers to get a better idea on where I think they stand. The weakest of those tiers is of course the lottery teams. This is where you'll find rebuilds like the Jazz, Hornets, Nets, and Wizards. Whether it's due to a lack of talent, a commitment to building for the future, or just youth, I have a hard time seeing any of these teams winning 30 games. Although I will say the Jazz probably have the ability to do so, I just think they're more focused on retooling than winning right now. As for my next tier, these are the play-in hopeful teams, and the first I've got in there is the Bulls. They've got an interesting group of young talent, but are still a very weak defense with clear offensive limitations. I'd rather see them drop into the lottery tier and aim for a top pick, but we know how Chicago loves to compete for that play-in spot. The next team I've got in this group is the Phoenix Suns. The roster has a nice combination of young talent and proven impact veterans. It's also filled with raw players who need time to develop, and I don't think they have the resources to field strong two-way lineups in a stacked West. That's also part of the reason why I've got the Pelicans in this tier. They've got lots of offensive potential and Zion looks amazing, but the defense leaves a lot to be desired at pretty much every position, and it's hard to bet on a team whose entire core has a long history of injuries. This next one might come as a bit of a shock, and that's the Celtics. They're one of the teams who I'm not entirely sure what to do with. As things currently stand, they've got tons of shooting talent and a really high offensive ceiling. That comes at the expense of a versatile defense spearheaded by maybe the weakest front court in the league. However, with a couple of moves and a return by Jason Tatum, they could easily jump a couple tiers into one of the best teams in the East. The last team I've got in this group is the Blazers. The offensive talent across the board is raw. They're still looking for a lead creator and scorer, and I think the lack of scoring punch limits their ceiling. From top to bottom, we're talking about just a ridiculous defensive roster though. I wouldn't be surprised to see them finish the season as a top 7 defense, which gives them such a high regular season floor. After that, I think there's another jump in tiers to the playoff hopeful. These teams could still be in the play-in, but they're more of a lock, and they're looking to get to the first round. The first squad I've got in there is the Raptors. They've got tons of size and length, and a versatile defensive roster with talented offensive players, so they should have a pretty decent floor. However, I think they really lack the half-court shot creation, outside shooting, and two-way depth to make any noise in the playoffs. The next team I've got in this group is the Kings. They're very talented on offense, with too strong of a top 8 or 9 players to not be in the mix, but with a generally weak defense and a roster incapable of creating elite two-way lineups, they're limited to a first-round ceiling. That's kind of an inverse of how I feel about the Heat. Miami's got an awesome, versatile defense that can go to a wide array of schemes and lineups. However, they really lack the ball handling, playmaking, and overall shot creation to produce a good playoff offense, so although I think they're a lock for the play-in, I can't really see them making the second round. That's slightly different from how I feel about the Pacers. While they don't have the interior defense Miami does, they're still a very versatile defensive team that should be able to contain the ball extremely well. Like the Heat though, they also lack perimeter shot creation without Halliburton, and I think the three-point shooting could be a problem in certain lineups. The difference for me is that their offense is a lot more flexible, with more reliable ball handlers and isolation scorers, as well as lots of pace, so I think they could sneak into the second round. Within this same tier, I'd say there's a slight jump in quality, but because these teams play in the West, it's a similar sort of floor and ceiling come playoff time. This is where I've got the Spurs. Their current roster has tons of offensive versatility, elite interior defense, and of course Victor Wembanyama. But they're still a young and pretty raw team. They don't have the greatest shooters, and still don't have the wing depth to field out elite two-way lineups, even though Wemby gives them such a high floor. I think they're a problem. I just think it's a couple years early, so I don't see them as a second round threat just yet. In a similar line of thinking, the Grizzlies to me are stuck in this group. They've got offensive and defensive talent, it just simply doesn't mesh into one rotation that's capable of being versatile on both sides of the ball. Along with the injuries they've had and continue to have, I don't see them threatening any of the Western Conference home court teams. This next group of teams I'd say are very similar in quality to the Grizzlies and the Spurs. However, they all play in the East, so the ceiling is a lot higher. I view these as teams who are capable of making a conference finals push but lack what it takes to get over that hump. The first of this group is the 76ers. At full strength, Philly's got absolutely ridiculous offensive potential with elite interior defense. That alone could get them to the top of this tier. But the backcourt defense and passing across the board are pretty obvious weak points, and between McCain's injury as well as the questions with Embiid, it's hard for me to get them much higher. The next team I've got in this group is the Bucks. Surrounding Giannis with shooters is a proven recipe for success, and they've done exactly that. I wouldn't be surprised if they won 50 games and he's an MVP candidate. However, they're another team that just seriously lacks versatility on both sides of the ball. They're sort of forced to play one way without the depth to field elite two-way lineups, so it's tough for me to see them competing with the top of the conference. Also in this group, I've got the Magic. Their defense gives them such a high floor, and we've seen that. They're probably going to be the toughest playoff out of anyone we've talked about, but there are still so many offensive question marks in regards to pace, playmaking, spacing, and overall shot making that worry me deep in the playoffs against more intentional scheming. Next up is the Atlanta Hawks. They're a team that checks all of the boxes in terms of versatility. They're big, they're athletic, they're deep, there's tons of variety in the offense and tons of variety in the defense. I just have two concerns. One is the shot creation outside of Trey. I think they could potentially get bottled up by an elite defense. Two is health. There's a long history of injuries on this squad, which is the main reason I have one team ahead of them in this tier, and that's the Pistons. Even with Jaden Ivey's injury, I just think they're built for playoff basketball. They're big and athletic with a near flawless defense. Then over the summer, they added secondary ball handling and shooting to complement Cade, while still having lots of room for internal development within their young core. However, I still think spacing is a concern in most lineups, and I'm not sure about their ability to construct units that are elite on both offense and defense, which is often what's needed to get into my next tier. Now we're getting into the dark horse contenders, a tier that starts with the Lakers. Within this tier, the Lakers break the mold of needing to construct lineups that are great on both offense and defense. That's because their offensive ceiling is so high, with the shot creation and shot making potential to outgun just about any team. The reason they don't break into a higher tier is because of all of their defensive concerns. Any lineup they construct around their core four is sacrificing a key quality, whether it's spacing, on-ball defense, or size. And I think you need lineup versatility to really pose a championship threat without everything breaking right. That's a test the Mavs pass with flying colors. Because of their size, length, and absolutely overwhelming defense, they've got unlimited lineup versatility. I actually think they'd be my pick right now for the second best defense in the NBA. The problem is, we don't know what Kyrie's gonna look like when he comes back, and even at full strength, there are quite a few question marks with the ball handling, overall shot creation, and spacing. My main concern though is what'll happen in the regular season. Because of injuries, I think they'll be fighting for a 7 or an 8 seed, and that likely means a team like OKC in round 1, making it difficult for me to see them making a push. From there, we're still in the same tier, but we're probably jumping up a small level with the Rockets. I actually had them in my top 5 before the Van Vliet injury. I think what he brought as an offensive organizer, ball handler, and pull-up three-point threat was a huge part of their identity. And if Reed Shepherd's able to replace even 75% of that, I'm comfortable bumping them up. I just need to see it first. They check almost every other box you'd look for in a contender. Size, length, and athleticism, lineup versatility with an elite defense, and the shot making of Kevin Durant to push them over any hump. Unless you get a big leap from Şengün or Amen though, I do think variety in the half-court offense could be a concern, and I wouldn't be surprised if they really struggle with turnovers. The last team I've got in this group is the Timberwolves. And to me, it's just as simple as they didn't improve enough from last year, if at all. It would take Ant taking another huge step forward or one of the young guys establishing themselves as a full-time starter to really move the needle. Without that, I think this is more or less the same team that's shown us a hard cap on their ceiling. A very strong defense that lacks the versatility to slow down the best of the best. A very strong offense that lacks the ability to break down high-end defenses. As long as they're relying on Mike Conley to be their starting point guard for a deep playoff run, I just don't see anything more than a conference finals. That takes us into the heavier hitting tiers. These are the teams with a final ceiling. If everything breaks right, they'll find themselves playing in June, but for one reason or another, I'm not comfortable giving them the label of a top tier contender. The first team I've got in this group is the Knicks. I actually think you could argue a few of the teams in my last tier are better, but New York gets a boost because they play in the East where there's only one other team on their level. There's an argument that they're the best offense in the NBA. When you pair that with tons of defensive pieces and serious depth, the roots of a contender are there. However, with Brunson and Cat on the floor together, they lack the versatility to field elite two-way lineups, which is a small gripe that I think holds them back from the top tier. The next team I've got in this group is the Warriors. Steph Curry surrounded by an elite defense is maybe the most proven recipe in basketball. Now what about Steph next to another 20 point per game scorer? Or Steph on a team that dominates the possession game? Or the fact that across the board, this is by far the smartest team in basketball. If everything goes right, their combination of shot making and defensive versatility gives them a championship ceiling. However, I could see them running into some offensive concerns deep in the playoffs and relying on Steph to bail them out. And the bigger question is of course their age and durability, which is the main reason why I don't have them in tier 1. That's also what's holding back the last team in this group, the Clippers. At full strength, I think this team is close to flawless. They played at a 58 win pace with Kawhi last year and got better in basically every way. Their roster is filled with playmaking, shot making, and offensive versatility, while being an elite defense across the board with at least 11 playable rotation players in the playoffs. I just have two small gripes. With Kawhi and Harden both being pretty jump shot reliant at this point, the team lacks high-end rim pressure, which makes them a bit volatile. Also, I'm not sure if they'll be able to construct elite 3-and-D lineups because their best defensive players are also their weakest shooters. When it comes down to basketball being played on the court though, I think the Clippers might be the second best team in the NBA. It's just the simple fact that they're so old and so injury prone that I could just as easily see them collapsing in the first round as I could see them competing for a ring. That takes us to the top tier, the best of the best, the inner circle of contenders, and this is where I've got the Cavs. I've got some slight concerns with their health considering their history, especially with Lonzo, so I'm tempering my expectations, but at full strength, this is just a special group. Tons of ball handlers, playmakers, and shooters. Elite interior defense with tons of lineup versatility. The backcourt defense is a bit of a weak point, but they basically check every box on both ends. And if I were forced to make a prediction, they'd be this year's championship runner-up. As for my Western Conference runner-up, that'd be the Nuggets. They were a top-tier team last year. They got more skilled, more versatile, and deeper over the summer, so it feels pretty self-explanatory. In my opinion, this is the best team of the Jokic era, and they'd be my pick for the #1 offense. However, there are still a few defensive limitations, and that's why I've got one team over them, the OKC Thunder. I feel like I don't need to say much. They won 68 games in a chip. Their entire core is young, so there's room for development. They're one of the best defensive teams ever with loads of offensive talent. So barring injury, they'd be my pick to repeat for a championship. Keep in mind, these are just my opinions based on the research I've done. The beauty of a preseason prediction is that it's just that, a prediction. Who knows what trades will happen mid-season, which young players will take a leap, or who gets injured. But just to recap where I'm at, my conference finals picks would be the Thunder, Nuggets, Cavs, and Knicks. I think the Warriors and the Clippers could compete for a championship if everything goes right, and the Wolves, Rockets, Mavs, and Lakers all feel like a longer shot to me. After that, we've got lots of interesting playoff, play-in, and rebuilding teams. And all that's to say, I couldn't possibly be more excited for the 2026 NBA season.